How to Live on 24 Hours a Day by Arnold Bennett. What you are about to hear is one of the most quietly revolutionary books ever written. It is not long. It does not shout. It does not promise miracles or easy answers. And yet, since it was first published in 1910, it has never stopped finding readers, because the problem it addresses has never stopped being real. The man who wrote it was Arnold Bennett, a celebrated English novelist, journalist, and observer of modern life. He was sharp, witty, and bracingly honest. He had spent years watching people, ordinary, decent, well-meaning people, go through their days in a kind of comfortable fog, always intending to do more, always feeling that life was somehow slipping past them, always telling themselves, when I have a little more time, I will begin. And one day Arnold Bennett sat down and said, "No, you will not have more time. You have never had more time. You have, right now, all the time there is, 24 hours a day. No more, no less. The same allowance given to every human being who has ever lived, from the greatest philosopher to the humblest clerk. The question is not how to find more time. The question is what on earth you are doing with the time you already have." This little book is his answer to that question. It is funny at moments and direct at others, and occasionally a little stern, in the way that a wise friend can afford to be stern, because they are speaking from genuine concern rather than superiority. It will not transform your life with a single listening. Bennett himself will be the first to warn you against expecting that, but it will do something perhaps more valuable. It will make you look, honestly and clearly, at the 24 hours you are handed each morning, and ask yourself whether you are truly living inside them or merely passing through. So settle in. The book is short. The ideas are timeless. And the hours, your hours, are already ticking. There's a type of man most of us have met, or perhaps have been, in our worst moments, who somehow never quite manages. He has a good income, a decent life, all the ingredients for comfort, and yet something always seems off. His flat is half empty. His new suit is topped with an old hat. He invites you to dinner and serves you cut glass with bad mutton. He cannot understand why things never quite add up. The explanation, his friends mutter among themselves, is simply that he fritters everything away. We are quick to notice this in others. We are all, in our superior moments, ready to advise the next man on how to manage his money. And yet, have you ever seen an essay on how to live on 24 hours a day? We have seen plenty of guidance on living within an income of money. Newspapers run debates on whether a woman can exist comfortably in the country on £85 a year. We read articles called "How to Live on 8 shillings a Week." Money, it seems, is endlessly discussed and endlessly managed and endlessly worried over. But time, the one resource that cannot be borrowed, cannot be earned extra, cannot be inherited. Almost no one talks about time in the same serious way. And yet, time is more than money. If you have time, you can usually obtain money. But no amount of money, however vast, will buy you a single extra minute. The wealthiest person in the world and the most modest street sweeper wake up each morning to precisely the same deposit. 24 hours. Not 1 second more for the rich. Not 1 second less for the poor. Think about what that means. You wake up in the morning in your purse. if we want to think it that way, is filled to the brim, 24 fresh and used hours. The unmanufactured tissue of your life, as it were, it is yours entirely. It is, when you stop to consider it, the most precious thing you possess. And here is what makes it almost miraculous. No one can steal it from you. You cannot go into debt with it. You can only spend the present moment. Tomorrow is already set aside, waiting for you untouched. There is no punishment for waste. The supply arrives again regardless. There is no privilege. Genius receives no extra hours, and idleness is not docked at the meter. In the realm of time, there is perfect democracy. And yet, here is the quiet, persistent, uncomfortable question. Which of us is actually living on 24 hours a day? Not existing, not muddling through. Actually living? Which of us is free from that low, nagging feeling that the important departments of life are not being managed as they ought to be? Which of us is not saying somewhere quietly to himself, which of us has not been saying for years, I shall alter that when I have a little more time? We never shall have any more time. We have, and we have always had, all the time there is. That is the truth, simple, glaring, and largely ignored. That leads to everything which follows. Perhaps someone is already prepared to object. I don't know what all the fuss is about. Such a person might say, I have no trouble living on 24 hours a day. I do everything I want to do, and I still find time left over for leisure. Surely it is straightforward enough, knowing that one only has 24 hours, to content oneself with 24 hours. To that person, should they exist, Bennett says, with genuine warmth, please step forward. I have been looking for you for 40 years. You ought to be writing this book, not reading it. Please introduce yourself. Meanwhile, the rest of us, that rather large and quietly suffering company of souls who feel the years slipping by, who sense that they have not yet gotten their lives into proper working order, will continue the conversation together. If we are honest about that feeling, the unease, the sense of always looking forward, of waiting for something that has not yet started, we find it is a feeling of aspiration, a yearning to do something beyond the bare formal requirements of existence, something more than maintaining ourselves and paying our bills, something that feeds not just the stomach but the mind and the soul. Now, unfulfilled aspiration is uncomfortable, it is true. A man may set out for a distant destination and never arrive, may face all manner of difficulties and obstacles along the road, and he will carry a certain quiet sorrow about that. But he will not suffer in the same way as the man who never even leaves home, the man who desires to travel but spends his whole life looking at the road from the window, telling himself he will go when the time is right. It is something to have set out. Most of us, if we are truthful, have not set out. We have not taken the first step. And our excuse, almost always, is that there are only 24 hours in the day. But consider, that wish to do something beyond a formal program is not weakness or vanity. It is, in fact, the very mark of a mind that has grown past a certain level. It is a natural expression of a restless, curious, developing intelligence. Until something is actually done to satisfy that wish, the sense of unease, of waiting for a life that has not quite begun, will remain. It will sit at every feast, however enjoyable the feast. It will tap you on the shoulder in your happiest moments and ask what you have done with your days. The good news is that something can be done. That is, after all, the whole point of this conversation. Very well. Suppose you're persuaded. Suppose you have admitted, at least privately to yourself, that there's a persistent low-level dissatisfaction with the way you arrange your days. Suppose you have acknowledged that you are always hoping to do certain things when you have more time, and that the uncomfortable truth is that more time is never coming. You have all the time there is right now. Naturally, you expect at this point to be handed the secret, the system, the beautifully organized method by which everything changes. There is no such secret. This is important enough to say plainly. There is no royal road, no ingenious technique, no cleverly designed timetable that will solve everything by itself. The path to a fuller life is hard and stony, and the rather disconcerting additional truth is that you never quite reach the destination. There's always more territory ahead. The most essential preliminary step before any practical business begins is a calm, honest reckoning with how difficult this actually is. Not to be frightening, but to be realistic. If you expect easy results and are not prepared for discouragement, you will give up at the first obstacle, and it is better not to begin at all than to begin dramatically and collapse within a fortnight. Because here is a particular danger of a grand beginning. Failure does not merely leave you where you started. A failure in a deliberately planned enterprise damages your sense of your own capability. And just as nothing succeeds like success, nothing fails quite like failure. Most people who find themselves unable to improve their lives are not undone by the size of their ambitions, but by having taken on too much too soon and collapsed under the weight of it. So the advice, very unfashionable, very undramatic, is this: start small. Start with something so modest it almost embarrasses you. Allow for accidents. Allow for the unpredictability of your own nature. Do not attempt to build Rome on the first day and lie exhausted in the ruins by the end of the week. There is something fine about this necessity to brace the will before beginning anything worth doing. It is, in fact, what separates a life genuinely engaged from a life merely drifted through. Now, how do you begin? You simply begin. If a man stood at the edge of a cold swimming bath, asking how to start the jump, you would not give him a lecture on the physics of water. You would say, take hold of your nerves and jump. And remember this. One of the most encouraging features of time is that you cannot waste it in advance. Every hour that comes is as fresh and unspoiled as if you had never frittered away a single moment in your life. You can turn over a new leaf every hour if you choose. There is no need to wait until Monday, or until the first of the month, or until after Christmas. The water will not be warmer next week. It will be colder. One more thing before you step in. Beware of your own enthusiasm. Ardor is a treacherous ally. It arrives with enormous energy and enormous appetite. It wants to move mountains immediately. It perspires heroically. And then without warning it dies without even offering a word of farewell. Ardor that starts too fast and too large is the engine of a great many abandoned projects. Begin small, move steadily, and above all, protect your early momentum, because a small sustained success is worth infinitely more than a magnificent attempt that burns out by the end of the second week. Let us look at where exactly those hours actually are. You spend roughly 7 hours earning your living. You spend roughly 7 hours sleeping. Allow 2 more for the various necessities of daily life. That accounts for 16. The remaining 8 hours remain stubbornly unaccounted for. Where do they go? To examine this honestly, we need to follow a particular man through a particular day, not an average man. There is no such creature, but a representative one. Say, a man who works in an office from 10 in the morning until 6 in the evening, with about 50 minutes each way spent traveling between home and work. Now, the great and deep mistake this man makes is not a mistake in his timetable. It is a mistake in his entire attitude toward the day. In the majority of cases, this man does not feel a passion for his work. At best, he does not actively dislike it. He begins his business duties as late as he can manage, with a certain reluctance, and he ends them as early as he can manage, with considerable relief. While at his desk, his energy is rarely at full power. He is present, technically, but not fully engaged, and yet, in spite of all this, he regards those 8 hours at work as the day, as the real and central business. Everything before and after it, the morning, the evening, the time with himself, are treated merely as prologue and appendix. They do not quite count. This is not a deliberate philosophy. It is more of an unconscious drift, but the effect is devastating. Because if a man has decided, however unconsciously, that the real business of the day is a stretch of time through which his chief desires to pass as quickly as possible, he has handed over the central hours of his existence to mere endurance. And in doing so, he tends to regard all the remaining hours, the 16 that are actually and entirely his, as leftover time. Margin, not the main event. This is not only illogical, it is a kind of tragedy, because those other 16 hours, from the moment he leaves work until the moment he returns, those hours are his, completely and absolutely his. He is not an employee during those hours. He is not preoccupied with monetary obligations. He is, in every meaningful sense, a free man with a private income of time. The shift that is needed is not a shift in schedule. It is a shift in how he thinks about his own days. And here is something important, something that surprises many people. Giving real energy and attention to those 16 hours will not drain the working 8. It will, if anything, enhance them. The mental faculties do not tire the way muscles tire. The mind does not need rest so much as it needs variety. Full engagement with interesting work in the evening does not leave a man hollow the next morning. It often leaves him more awake, more curious, more genuinely alive in everything he does. But right now, let's be honest about how those 16 hours are typically spent. In the morning, before work, very little time is truly wasted. The typical man is up, breakfasted, and out of the door by just after 9. The loss begins the moment he steps outside. He walks to the station in a kind of mental coma. He arrives, waits on the platform, and allows the time simply dissolve while the railway company quietly robs him of minutes that will never return. He has a coin of time, a full and solid coin, and he is content to receive change for it at a ruinous exchange rate. He boards a train. And what does he do with this rare pocket of quiet, of solitude, of uninterrupted time. He reads his newspaper, cheerfully and at length. Now, the point is not that newspapers have no value. They have value. But to spend 30 or 40 minutes of genuinely private, genuinely undisturbed time that could be given to something that builds a mind and nourishes the soul, in the passive consumption of news that will be forgotten by evening, this is quite simply a misuse of a precious resource. Those minutes matter. We shall come back to what to do with them. The evening tells a fuller story. You emerge from your office. You are pale, your wife says, and tired, and you have, over the course of the journey home, gradually worked yourself into the feeling of tiredness, which is a different thing from actually being tired. You arrive home. You do not eat immediately. You sit. You smoke, perhaps. You see a friend or two. You potter about. You pick up a book and put it down again. You observe without particular alarm that old age is slowly approaching. You take a short stroll. You sit at the piano and play 3 chords. You look at the clock and discover, somehow inexplicably, that it is 11:15, and then you spend roughly 40 minutes thinking about going to bed, and then you go to bed. 6 hours or more have passed since you left the office. They are gone as completely as if they had never existed. Gone like a dream, gone like magic, quite unaccountably gone. This is a fair portrait, honest and familiar. And before you object, before you say that a man is tired, a man must see his friends, a man cannot always be at full stretch, consider what happens when you have a genuine engagement in the evening. A theater trip, perhaps, or a rehearsal, or a dinner you are actually looking forward to. Suddenly the tiredness is nowhere in evidence. You dress, you travel, you keep yourself fully engaged for 3 or 4 hours. You come home and you go directly to bed. No lingering. No 40 minutes of thinking about it. And the evening felt rich and full and, if anything, not quite long enough. The secret is not energy. It is purpose. Give the evening a shape, a real shape, with something real at the center of it. And the tiredness lifts. The engines engage. The hours feel inhabited rather than merely endured. What is being suggested here is modest, not every evening, not a rigid, joyless schedule. Simply, 3 evenings a week, set aside an hour and a half for something that genuinely demands a mind, something consecutive, something building, something that requires you to actually show up to it with your full attention. The other evenings remain entirely yours, for friends, for music, for whatever domestic comfort or idle pleasure suits you. And the weekend, that immense and generous stretch from Saturday afternoon to Monday morning, is left entirely untouched. 7.5 hours a week. That is all that is being asked. But here is a condition. Those hours must be treated as sacred, not approximately sacred, not sacred when nothing better comes along, but as genuinely and firmly committed as a theater ticket or a sporting fixture. When someone asks for that time, the answer must be, I cannot, I have to work. This will feel strange at first. It will feel faintly absurd. The immortal soul is so much less urgent than a tennis match. It always has been. Now a word about the architecture of the week. For many years, the author worked 7 days a week, following a program every day without exception. He was told repeatedly by older and wiser people that more could be accomplished and more genuine living extracted from 6 days and from 7. And now, with the benefit of a regular day of rest, one day each week in which no program is followed and no effort is made beyond what the mood of the moment suggests, he has come to understand what they meant. Only those who lived at full stretch for a long time, without any break at all, can truly appreciate the beauty of recurring idleness. Rest is not merely the absence of effort. It is something that replenishes and restores in ways that additional effort cannot. The recommendation, then, is this: confine your formal program to 6 days. If some week you find yourself wishing to extend it by all means, but treat that extra time as a windfall, as an unexpected gift, not as a regular obligation. That way, when the natural rhythms of life prevent you from extending it, you do not feel like a failure or a backslider. You simply return to your 6 days without the sense of having fallen short. Now, those 7.5 hours, half an hour each morning on 6 days, and an hour and a half on 3 evenings, may seem like very little when set against the full 168 hours of a week. And you might well ask whether anything meaningful can be accomplished in so small an amount of time. The answer is yes. Emphatically yes. Not because of the hours themselves, but because of what happens to the rest of the time when those hours are genuinely and consistently used. There's a kind of contagion to purposeful effort. An hour given seriously to the development of the mind in the evening does not stay contained in that hour. It quickens the mind for the following day. It adds a sharpness of interest to things that were previously dull. It changes the texture of the entire week. A man who does 10 minutes of physical exercise morning and evening does not benefit only during those 20 minutes. His whole physical condition improves throughout every hour of every day. The same logic applies to the mind. But here's the warning, stated again because it deserves to be stated twice. Changing habits is genuinely hard. The difficulty is not in the plan. The plan is simple. The difficulty is in the fact that those hours, poorly used as they have been, were still being used in some fashion. Something was happening in them, even if that something was merely drifting. To replace drift with purpose means changing a habit, and habits are stubborn, deep-rooted, and perfectly capable of defeating even the most sincere intentions. So protect your self-respect. Begin with something so small that success is nearly guaranteed. And when 3 months have passed and you have kept to it, then, only then, begin to make larger plans. Allow more time than you think you need. For those 90 evening minutes, give yourself the full stretch from 9 until 11:30. Accidents will happen. Human nature will assert itself. Allow for it. People say with a shrug, one cannot help one's thoughts. This is not true. The control of the thinking machine, the actual disciplining of where and how the mind directs its attention, is entirely possible. It is not easy, but it is possible, and it is learnable, and it may be one of the most consequential skills a person can develop. Consider everything that happens to you, every pain and every pleasure, every fear and every joy, exists only within your own consciousness. Nothing reaches you except through the machinery of your mind. And if that machinery is undisciplined, if it skips and lurches and catastrophizes and wanders without direction, then no external circumstance can fully compensate. Conversely, a person who can direct their own thinking with genuine authority has a kind of freedom that no external condition can entirely take away. Yet most people live and die without ever seriously attempting to develop this control. They complain of being unable to concentrate, not realizing that concentration is a capacity that can be built, not a talent that one either has or lacks. Here is an exercise, simple in description, difficult in practice. Tomorrow morning, when you leave your house and begin to walk to the station, choose a subject, any subject, and hold your mind to it. You will not have gone 10 paces before it has escaped you and gone wandering off in some entirely unrelated direction. Bring it back. It will escape again. Bring it back again. By the time you reach the station, you will have retrieved it perhaps 40 times. This is normal. This is not failure. This is exactly the process. Do this every morning, not for some future benefit alone, but because the practice itself is the benefit. Each retrieval is a repetition. Each repetition builds a capacity. Over weeks and months, the mind becomes more obedient, more focused, more genuinely under your own authority. And before dismissing this as abstract or impractical, recall a morning when you received an urgent and worrying letter that required a carefully composed reply. Do you remember how, on that morning, your mind stayed focused on that problem without the slightest effort? How you arrived at the office and wrote the reply immediately, having composed it entirely during the journey? That was concentration, natural, involuntary, and produced by the urgency of the situation. The exercise simply asks you to produce that state voluntarily, by your own choice, rather than waiting for circumstances to force upon you. As for what to concentrate on, the subject almost does not matter. What matters is the discipline. But you may as well choose something worth thinking about, a chapter of Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus, read the evening before and turned over the mind during the morning journey, is not a bad place to start. Do not be put off by the names. These are not stuffy academic texts. They are among the most plain-spoken, practically minded, useful observations on daily life and daily conduct that have ever been written. Try it, get your mind in hand, and watch as the process quietly dissolves one of the great persistent miseries of modern life, that shapeless, gnawing, avoidable suffering known as worry. Mind control, as we have been discussing it, is a preliminary, valuable in itself, but ultimately a preparation for something more important. Think of it this way. Learning to concentrate the mind is like practicing scales on the piano. The scales are not music. They are the preparation for music. Having developed an obedient and disciplined mind, the next question is, what do you now do with it? And here the answer, across all sensible traditions and across all ages, is remarkably consistent. Not literature, not history, not science, though all of these have their place. The deepest and most rewarding course of study begins with one's own self. Know thyself. The phrase is ancient and well-worn to the point of cliché, and yet it contains everything. The reflective mood, the habit of turning the mind deliberately back upon one's own life, one's own choices, one's own principles and conduct, is what is most conspicuously absent from the average well-intentioned modern existence. We move quickly through our days. We react, we respond, we manage, but we rarely stop to ask, what is my life actually for? Am I moving in a direction I would choose? If I were choosing deliberately, is there a coherent connection between what I believe and how I actually behave? These are not comfortable questions, but they are the questions on which happiness actually depends. Because here is what men have discovered, who have genuinely thought about it. Happiness does not come from the accumulation of pleasures, physical or mental. It comes from the development of reason and the steady alignment of conduct with principles, from knowing what you value and living accordingly, from the reflective examination of the gap between where you are and where, on your own terms, you ought to be. If you admit this, and it is difficult to honestly deny it, and still give no part of your day to that kind of examination, then you are in a strange position of wanting a destination while refusing to take the necessary road. Now, and this is important, the point is not to impose any particular principles upon anyone. Whatever you believe, whatever your philosophy, whatever your sense of what matters, that is your own business. The only argument being made is that a life in which conduct does not roughly accord with principles is a confused and unhappy life, and that the only way to bring them into alignment is through regular, honest, deliberate reflection. Even small things demonstrate this. The next time you lose your temper with a waiter because the steak is overcooked, take a moment, even afterward, to call reason into room and ask what actually happened. Reason will tell you, calmly and without reproach, that the waiter did not cook the steak, that your anger produced no improvement in the steak, and that the sum total of your performance was a loss of dignity and a soured interaction, with no benefit whatsoever to anyone. Armed with this quiet analysis, the next time the steak arrives wrong, you simply and pleasantly and effectively ask for a better one. The gain is small in isolation. Accumulated over a lifetime, it is everything. When should this reflection happen? The evening journey home offers a natural opportunity. The work of the day is behind you. The mind is not yet occupied with the business of the evening. A few minutes of honest inward accounting, rather than another scan of the newspaper, will do more for the quality of your life than almost anything else you might spend those minutes on. And then, the evening hours themselves. There's a common mistake made by people who genuinely wish to use their evenings better. They conclude that the only alternative to idle drifting is the study of literature, and since they happen not to feel a natural enthusiasm for literature, they conclude that serious self-cultivation is simply not for them. They go back to drifting. This is a mistake born of unnecessarily narrow thinking. Literature is one road, and a fine one, but the territory to be explored is vast, and there are many roads through it. Take music. Perhaps you attend concerts occasionally. You enjoy the experience in a general, pleasurable way. You feel something stir when the great themes arrive. And yet you cannot say precisely which instruments are playing or why the effect is produced or what the composer is doing structurally to create that particular sensation. Now, your inability to perform music does not mean you cannot understand it, and understanding it, even at a basic structural level, would not diminish the experience. It would intensify it enormously. The orchestra would cease to be a pleasant blur and become what it actually is, a precisely balanced organism in which every section has a specific function and a specific voice. The music you already enjoy would reveal layers you could not previously hear. And this is not a project requiring years of conservatory training. A few good books, read with genuine attention over the course of a winter's worth of evenings, could achieve exactly this. By the end of a year of serious engagement, 3 short evenings a week, supplemented by actual attendance at concerts with new ears, a person could genuinely know something about music, not perform it. Know it, which is a different and in many ways richer thing. The same principle applies to any of the other arts, architecture, painting, the history of any one of them. The point is not to become an expert. The point is to move from passive consumer to active participant, from a person things happen to a person who is genuinely engaging with what the world contains. And if you genuinely dislike all the arts, if music leaves you cold and painting bores you and literature seems an obstacle, then take heart. You are not excluded. Because the arts, magnificent as they are not the greatest thing on offer. The most important perception available to a human being is the perception of cause and effect, the habit of seeing, in everything that happens, the chain of causes that produce it and the chain of effects that will follow from it. This is, at its deepest level, the habit of scientific thinking. And it has 2 remarkable effects on the person who develops it. First, it makes life less painful. When something goes wrong, when something is stolen, when something is lost, when someone behaves badly, the person who instinctively looks for causes does not simply suffer the fact of it. They observe it. They trace it. A thief became a thief through causes of heredity and environment that are, once you begin to examine them, genuinely interesting. This does not mean the theft was acceptable. It means the response to it is something other than helpless outrage. You buy another watch, and you do so with a philosophy that makes bitterness unnecessary. Second, and more wonderfully, the perception of cause and effect makes life far more interesting. Everything becomes part of an interconnected story. Nothing is arbitrary. Nothing is isolated. A change in traffic patterns in one part of city leads, through a chain of entirely comprehensible steps, to rising rents in a neighborhood miles away. A decision made by a railway company changes the shape of a suburb. An economic policy affects the daily choices of thousands of people who never heard the policy discussed. Nothing is humdrum. Not a single thing in the observable world, if you look at it through the lens of cause and effect, is genuinely dull. It is only dull if you look at it in isolation, as a disconnected fact rather than as a knot in an enormous web of causes and consequences. Take your own profession. Whatever it is, if you have come to find it tedious, it is almost certainly because you have never seriously examined it as a subject of study. The history of your industry, the economic forces that shape it, the ways in which it connects to larger movements in society. These things are genuinely interesting, and studying them transforms a job from something to be endured into something to be understood. And what is understood is always, to some degree, interesting. You do not need formal study or expensive equipment. You need curiosity and a willingness to follow a question wherever it leads. The whole field of daily life, every habit, every scene, every relationship, every process you encounter in your ordinary week, is waiting to satisfy a curiosity that, once awakened, does not stop. And the satisfaction of that curiosity is not merely pleasurable. It builds, slowly and surely, what can only be called an understanding heart. For those who do find themselves drawn to reading, and there are many, a word of practical guidance about the kind of reading that genuinely develops the mind. Novels, to be clear, are not the right material for these particular 90 minutes. This is not a judgment on the novel as a form. Some of the greatest literature in any language is prose fiction, but a good novel does something quite particular. It sweeps you along. It carries you forward with an irresistible current, requiring very little active effort from you, depositing you at the final page, perhaps breathless but not genuinely exercised. The best novels, in fact, are the smoothest rides. And the cultivation of the mind requires friction. It requires a sensation of genuine effort, of a task that part of you wants to complete and another part of you wants to avoid. That slight internal resistance is not an obstacle to mental growth. It is the mechanism of it. Poetry produces this sensation more reliably and more intensely than almost any other form of literature. It demands everything: full attention, active interpretation, patience with difficulty, willingness to read and reread. It yields, in proportion to the effort, the highest form of pleasure available through language, and it teaches, over time, a kind of wisdom that cannot quite be arrived at any other way. If poetry feels alien, if it seems remote, archaic, difficult without reward, begin with an essay on the nature of poetry itself. Once the purpose and pleasure of the form are understood, the resistance tends to dissolve, and the reader who is convinced they dislike poetry often discovers they had simply never been properly introduced to it. From there, narrative poetry is a natural entry point, purely story-driven, accessible, and carry within it genuine literary quality. It offers a way into the experience of poetry that does not require any prior expertise. If, after a genuine attempt, poetry remains genuinely unappealing, history or philosophy will serve as well. Great works in either field are, perhaps surprisingly, among the most lucid things ever written. The very greatness of a masterpiece often comes from the clarity of its thinking. In choosing where to begin, two pieces of advice matter enormously. The first, be specific. Do not decide to read more. Decide to know something about a particular period, a particular figure, a particular question. Say, I will understand the French Revolution, or the life of a particular composer, or the central arguments of a particular philosopher. This specificity gives the effort shape and direction, and the pleasure of arriving somewhere definite is far greater than the pleasure of wandering agreeably without destination. The second, think as well as read. Reading without reflection is motion without arrival. People who read voraciously and never seriously engage with what they have read are like drivers whose only interest is the distance covered, not the landscape. The 90 minutes of reading should include at least 45 minutes of genuine, effortful reflection on what has been read. This will slow your pace. It should slow your pace. Never mind the pace. Forget the goal for now. Attend to the country you are passing through. And one day, perhaps when you're not quite expecting it, you will look up and find that you are somewhere you very much wanted to be. We are nearly at the end of this conversation. But there are a few dangers worth naming before we close. Dangers that lie in wait specifically for the person who has successfully begun. The first, and in some ways the most unexpected, is the danger of becoming insufferable. When a person discovers a truth that has genuinely changed their life, the temptation to share it constantly, urgently, with everyone they meet can become overwhelming. They become the person who can barely get through a dinner party without explaining how everyone else is wasting their time. They develop a faint look of pain forbearance in the presence of friends who spend their evenings idly. They have found the way, and they cannot quite understand why everyone else has not also found it. This person is a prig, and they are, as a rule, tedious to be around in proportion to the sincerity of their conviction. The antidote is simple. Remember that you are managing your own time, not your neighbors, not your colleagues, not your families. The world turned long before you discovered these ideas, and will continue to turn regardless of how well or how poorly you apply them. Be discreet about your program. Do what you are doing without announcing it. The results will speak eventually, without the need for commentary. The second danger is becoming enslaved to your own program. A program is a tool, not a master. It deserves respect and consistency, but it should not be treated as a sacred text for which no deviation is possible. Life is larger than any timetable, and a person who cannot set the program aside for an evening with an old friend or for an unexpected opportunity has transformed a means of living into an obstacle to it. Treat your program seriously. Do not worship it. The third danger is the gradual accumulation of rush. This happens when the program is too ambitious, when each item in it is pursued breathlessly, with one eye already on the next item, so that the mind is never actually present in what it is doing. Existence becomes a kind of harried prison, even if the prison is self-constructed and theoretically improving. If you notice this happening, the cure is not to break the program with deliberate idleness. The cure is to go back to the beginning and attempt less. Fill the program less full. Leave margin. And if, as a temporary measure, a few minutes of conscious, deliberate, aware idleness between activities helps to restore a sense of ease, then take those minutes freely and without guilt. And the last danger, which has been mentioned before, but which bears repeating one final time, the danger of an early failure. Everything depends on getting through the beginning. The first weeks of a new effort are the most fragile. The impulse toward a fuller life is real and valuable, but it is also new and easily extinguished. Protect it. An early failure does not merely delay progress. It can wound the very impulse that made progress possible. So start small. Start consistently. Choose your first activities based entirely on what actually interests you, not on what seems most improving or most impressive. If your genuine curiosity is about the natural history of insects, study insects. If it is the history of architecture, study that. The subject matters far less than the habit of genuine engagement. The habit, once formed, will find its own direction. And so we arrive at the end of our 24 hours. What Arnold Bennett is really asking is not very complicated. It is, in fact, almost embarrassingly simple. He is asking you to be honest about the fact that you have more time than you think you do, that the hours which appear to be used are, in many cases, merely passing. that the life you feel you have not quite started is available to you, not in some distant future when circumstances become more convenient, but in the ordinary days you are already living. The 24 hours you receive each morning are not a problem to be managed. They are a fortune to be used. They are, as he says, the most precious of possessions and the most democratic. Kings and laborers, the brilliant and the modest, the healthy and the ailing, everyone receives exactly the same allowance. No one gets extra. No one has less. What you do with them is entirely and without exception your own business. But consider, at the end of a week in which you gave 7.5 hours, not to rest, not entertainment, but to the genuine, deliberate cultivation of your own mind and your own soul, you would be a different person than you were at the start of it. Not dramatically, not visibly, perhaps, but different, a little more curious, a little more in control of your own attention, a little more aware of the relationship between what you believe and how you actually live. And at the end of a year of such weeks, you would be substantially different. Not perfect. That is not on offer. The path to Mecca, as Bennett has already warned us, is hard and stony, and you never quite arrive. But you will have left Brixton. You will have set out, and there is, as he quietly insists, something in that. Something rather a lot. The hours are there. They have always been there. Every single one of them, waiting for you, fresh and unspoiled, as if you had never wasted a moment in your life. What will you do with them tomorrow?